All right, guys, welcome to By the Horns, podcast about Bitcoin maximalism in South Africa. My name is Ricki and I'm joined by my co-host, Brandon van Zyl. Today, we're joined by none other than Conscious Caracal, otherwise known by his Christian name, Ernst van Zyl. Ernst has long been a voice for reason and freedom in the alt media landscape in South Africa, despite his young years, and he currently works for Afriforum as their campaign officer for strategy and content. Ernst, welcome to the show. Glad to have you.
Thank you very much for having me on, Ricki, and I'm glad that you're just another plant in the bigger ecosystem of the alt media. I think it's an excellent thing. I just want the garden to grow. The more trees and the more life forms and biological forms there are in this ecosystem, the more robust it will become in regards to symbiotic relationships, people being able to connect with more like-minded people, having a bit more variance and diversity in regards to viewpoints and angles. It can only be for the better. So I'm glad to see you've also entered the fray.
100%, man. And yeah, like I said before we started recording, like our main aim with this show is to enter Bitcoin into the kind of freedom incorporated narrative in South Africa. We feel that's one aspect that's kind of been left out at the moment, and it's a missing piece in our opinion. Because when it comes down to it, the money, you fix the world, you know. And if we're running on the government's money, that allows the government to subvert us if we become too dangerous to them. And that's really what we want to get to in this episode specifically, is like, how do you state-proof yourself against the government? Like, what can you do? On that note, I think let's jump straight into our first talking point here. So the question we've got for you is, like, why do people need to state-proof themselves? You know, what's the point? Is government gonna, be there to look after us, or should we be worried and need to start taking personal responsibility?
So the concept of state-proofing your life is a concept that was thought up by Bitvice, who works at the Solidarity Movement, and he wrote about it extensively in his book, Die Pad na Selfbestuur, The Road to Self-Governance, and pretty much in regards to why you should state-proof your life, because as a South African, you understand what it's like being at the mercy in many regards of the state's incompetence and corruption and just maladministration. So the more you can pretty much state-proof yourself, the better, the sounder you can sleep at night, knowing that you have a government that's going to be corrupt for the foreseeable future, that's going to mess up for the foreseeable future. Rather than just being afloat in this dark ocean of uncertainty, you can take as much as possible into your own hands. And when I'm talking about as much as possible, I'm talking about responsibilities. And this is the bitter pill of state-proofing your life. It's not all fun and excitement. The reward is that you have less uncertainty. You have much more of your fate in your own hands. You have much more confidence for the future of your family and your community. But the very, very expensive price that you pay is that you have to start taking responsibilities for things that the state used to provide for you. So a lot of people are intimidated by that idea. They'd much rather have the state take care of their safety and of roads and of infrastructure and of cleaning their communities and all these different things that are pretty much just making your life easier in theory. I think it's human nature to want as little responsibility and as little costs that you have to cover, and that's the thing. But when it comes to this type of lifestyle where the state is doing all these things for you, only when you really stop to think do you realize that actually, while you were selling all your responsibilities or rather outsourcing your responsibilities to the state, you were selling your freedom as well, and you're having control over your destiny as well. Because when you are completely dependent on the state for many aspects of your life, that means when the state fails and when the state is taken over or the government is taken over by a corrupt party or an inept party, all these luxuries that the state have been providing for you and all these outsourced responsibilities are going to start causing a lot of trouble in your life. So in short, that's pretty much the reason why you should start state-proofing your life, seeing as you will be taking a lot more responsibility, you will be putting a lot more weight on your shoulders, but the reward of it is you will have a lot more certainty in your life going forward, and also you will have a lot more control over your fate, pretty much.
Absolutely, man. Yeah, that's a great explanation for it. But so for those people who have been living under a rock or in Constantia and don't realize that the state is falling apart around us, let's discuss some aspects of the degradation of the nation state of South Africa currently. So everyone hears about service delivery, collapsing.
Mm.
I mean, where do we kick it off with? Public safety degradation. What's your guys' view on that?
Well, in regards to public safety, you can just see at the abysmal state of the South African police service currently, losing records, not being able to. I mean, I can't even give you the stats of the amount of murder cases that are actually solved. It's something ridiculous, like
20%.
Yeah, it's minuscule, and then also at the same time. I think a good case study for the failure of the state's responsibility to keep us safe and security apparatus is the fact that South Africa has one of the largest private security forces in the world, a private security force that outnumbers the military and police force combined. Now, that is a symptom of a state that has abysmally failed in regards to keeping its citizens safe. Another good case study is pretty much the farm murder phenomenon in South Africa, or rather broadly, rural security. This is also in an abysmal state of crisis. I mean, if you look at the amounts of murders that happen in our rural areas, and specifically the targeting of farmers and the state failing to keep these farmers safe, also keeping in mind the integral role these farmers play in their industry, in their communities, and to the nation, it pretty much demonstrates that the state is completely in over its head, and it can't really handle the crime epidemic that the country is faced with, and it doesn't seem to have the answers, even though it very arrogantly likes to state that everything is fine and everything's working out. All the evidence and reality point to the contrary. So in regards to state security and safety, to tie that to state proofing, the first step that you can do is to get your legal firearm license. I'm not advocating that people just become cowboys and not go through the legal route. You need to do all the legal steps. It's going to be a long walk. It's going to be a very difficult and process that takes a lot of patience, but I can't stress enough, you need to do it legally, and in the end you will get a little bit more of your freedom back that you've pretty much surrendered to the state by being dependent on SAPs to keep you safe. So that's in regards to tying that back to state proofing your life. The very first simple step that you can do is starting the process of getting your legal firearm license, and then you will be able to pretty much not completely state-proof your life in regards to safety, but you will be a very long way ahead of your compatriots in this country.
Yeah, man, I've actually recently started the process, and it is a ball ache. It's going to take some time, but you've got to do it. Like, you can't farm that. No one, you're your own first responder. No one's going to come in save you in that time that someone's breaking into your house, threatening your family. I mean, the police are going to take half an hour to an hour to get there, by which time they're coming to collect fingerprints, but they can't even do that anymore because they don't have any fingerprint supplies. And that kind of brings us to the next point, which is the degradation of the judiciary. The ability for police, for evidence to actually be brought to court and actually for that to be processed and for people to go to jail, that is falling apart. What do you do then? How do you state proof yourself against the judiciary that's failing you and you don't have access to justice anymore?
Well, Ricki, that is definitely one of the big theoretical and academic questions that a lot of people much smarter than me are currently wrestling with. Someone that will be in a very good source to talk about this too is Professor Milan. He's written There's No Supreme Constitution. He will definitely be able to give you a very detailed and good answer on this. This is definitely one of the big problems, because you can't just have your own town's court and then that takes over the role of the court system. It is one of the big hurdles to get over, but it is a conundrum that has a solution, and people are working on it. Unfortunately, I'm not an expert in the field, so I'm not going to speculate in regards to how you're going to do it, but I can assure you that this is at the forefront of some of the questions that community-minded and state-proof-minded people like me and people at the Solidarity Movement are throwing a lot of thought and time at very persistently.
So, I mean,
I'm glad.
On these 2 points, guys, so like going back to guns and then the degradation of the judiciary, I have a lot of friends, call them like Karens and Franks, I guess, who are scared to get guns because if you shoot someone self-defending yourself, then you've got a long legal process ahead of you, right? I don't know how to like pose a question here, but like, what should people do to prove that they were protecting themselves, and what are the right ways to go about it? obviously protecting yourself, you need to learn how to use a gun, but like, what's the next steps there? I don't know if you've worked with anybody before who's been through that process, but I know there's a lot of people who are scared to get guns because of that, because we do not have good laws and processes in place to protect people who defended themselves in the first place.
Yeah, no, this is a very complicated subject, and I wouldn't want to give anyone false or incorrect legal advice regarding this. But I can tell people there's an episode on my YouTube channel, on the Conscious Caracal channel, where I talked to Gideon Uber, who and he answered this specific question at the end. Regarding what are your rights, when can you use your firearm, in what situation, and he answered in very high detail. So I think I would feel much more comfortable to redirect people to that conversation if they want to know the answer, that he knows the inside this issue inside and out. And I think it's something that people need to be clued up on when you go through the process of getting your legal firearm license.
Sure. So I think we'll get that show in the show notes, Ricki.
Yeah, absolutely. So we spoke to Gideon last week. We'll put that in the show notes, and we'll also put Conscious Caragal's interview with Gideon as well for people who want to find out more about it. So maybe just a
little bit of admin or a detail that I think is important. The episode's name on my channel is "Stay Proofing Your Life: Getting Your Firearm License," and you'll see Gideon in the thumbnail.
Brilliant. Okay, so the next point here, one of the big issues that we've spoken about quite a bit is the land reform issue. So in South Africa, there's the topic of land. The EFF is very vocal about it. People seem to think that, getting access to land will solve everyone's problems. But the IRR has done a large amount of research into it and found that most people, in fact, would rather take money over land. And then you combine that with the fact that there's a report that came out last week, between 70 to 90% of farms that have been doled out by the state have failed. So
I can confirm that it's much closer to 90% than 70%. I'm not saying that tongue in cheek. I've looked at the statistics.
Yeah. So this is a big issue for food security, right? So this now comes down to the point you were making earlier about farmers and that they're actually like a national asset, because we've got to, if we don't have farmers, we don't have food. South Africa is a net exporter of food. And we hope to remain that way. But if we go down the route of expropriation without compensation, we can expect our food production to collapse. So how do we, how do you deal with that one? Like, how do you state proof yourself against not having food?
Well, in regards to state proofing yourself when it comes to food is a broader issue. It's not just talking about the amount of food you can put on your table. It's a community matter. So you need to make sure that there's infrastructure in place where people can be assisted that are struggling to get food. So this is with organizations like Help and the Hunt, part of the solidarity movement, which specifically provides food to people that are struggling. We did during the lockdown, we handed out food parcels to people in need, specifically not people without the security of having food on their table during the lockdown. And regarding that question regarding land, there's an interesting angle to it that I think, or not an interesting, I think it's an important angle, and that, yes, there's a very destructive side to it, and it's been covered by a lot of people. It's it's what most people focus on. But there's another aspect to it, and that's the immorality of it. It's theft at the end of the day. Expropriation without compensation is theft. There's no two ways about it. It's confiscation of someone's private property without giving them any compensation. It's pretty much like you sitting next to someone, taking their phone and saying, well, this has pretty much been confiscated, has been expropriated without compensation. And I don't think people need to use euphemisms. I don't think people need to use kid gloves when talking about the moral impact or the moral implications of this. It is absolute theft, and people need to start calling it as that. Now, another thing that comes up in regards to the whole land issue is the fact that this idea of a hunger for land. So when I was doing my presentation before the South African Parliament as a representative of Afriforum earlier this year on the expropriation bill, I read some statistics to Parliament that I think pretty much seals the fate of any type of debate or argument regarding this. So there is a restitution process. People need to keep this in mind. There is a process in place where if you were possessed under the previous regime and your land was taken away or confiscated, and you have proof of this, you can get your land back through this process. Unfortunately, the government is phenomenally corrupt. So in regards to the restitution process, a lot of these farms are not going to the rightful owners. A lot of these farms that were dispossessed under the previous regime are ending up in the hands of the politically connected, a lot of people that have no claim to that land. And then secondly, another thing that's very important to this conversation is the fact that the restitution process is not a complete failure. Land has been returned to many people that were dispossessed under the previous regime that provided proof. And in regards to land claims, and this is according to the government's own statistics, 95% of land claims have been settled with this restitution process. And now there are some statistics that come with that. So the first one is 82% of all these land claims were lodged in urban areas. So this is not a hunger for farmland. 93% of all plaintiffs preferred financial compensation over land. Again, this does not indicate a hunger for farmland at all. 95% of all land reform projects in South Africa fail, and commercial farms are converted into subsistence farms or squatter camps, according to the government's own statistics. So the statistics that came out, or not that came out, it was pretty much just cited in a piece or in an article last week. These statistics have been around for a while, and the statistics that I have in regards to what the government is saying is that 95% of all these land reform projects fail. So, and then a last statistic that I think is also very damning in regards to specifically this very often cited hunger for agricultural land is that of all the land that the government has acquired since the start of the land reform process, only 6% has been transferred to private ownership. So even if you go on the premise that there is this hunger for agricultural land, the government isn't giving away the land that it's acquiring. So we are in a situation where, so people often say the problem with the current system is that we use the willing buyer, willing seller system or process, and the problem is that we don't have willing sellers. No, the problem is we have willing sellers. The government is a willing buyer, but the government isn't a willing distributor. That's the problem. That's what we're sitting with. The government is getting all this land and then it's not giving it away. Has only given away about 6% of it. So that is the problem that we're sitting with, and that's why all these land reform projects fail. Is because the government has no intention or doesn't seem to have any desire to really help these people that get the land. And that's not even getting into the issue of the politically connected and the corrupt being handed farms and people without any knowledge of agriculture. And that's why a lot of these projects fail. So the fact is, it's not because Black South Africans can't farm. It's because of the process of who is actually getting the land. Firstly, it's people that are politically connected that don't have any knowledge of farming. They just get the land as an asset that they can use to enrich themselves. And secondly, those that have knowledge of farming and agriculture that get the land don't get any support from government in that they've been promised in regards to feed and seed and manure. They don't get any of it. They don't get any support from government. And to get more detail on these statistics, I don't want to stay on this point too long. You can go watch the documentary Disrupted Land by Afriforum. We go into all those statistics and we talk to some of these farmers that were given land by the government and just through land reform projects and just didn't get any support at all.
Yeah, I mean, you need to look no further than that, right, to see what's really going on. If you've presented with that evidence, you can see what the government's really playing at is they have no intention of handing out the land. It's a land grab. It's not a land distribution. All right, that's quite bleak, but I mean, it is what it is. And this is what we're dealing with here. So all that being taken into account, all hope is not lost, obviously. Can some communities still function to some degree, or can some communities still prosper within a failed state?
Absolutely. I think the world is full of these types of examples. But I think you don't even have to look at the world. You can just look at South Africa. You can look at what's already being done. So let's take, for example, the failed state element off the table first and just look at a failing state and a discriminatory state on top of that. So let's look at the discriminatory part first. let's take the case study of universities, and me as an Afrikaans speaking person that has a very strong love for my language has a very big stake in this, where Afrikaans language is being pushed out from universities in South Africa. What is the solution? Do you just start going to English universities and suck it up? Or do you build your own university and your own colleges and your own institutions? Well, at the Solidarity Movement, we went for the latter. We started building our own universities and colleges. We've literally built a college, Soltech, which is a technical college, and we have established a university called Academia. It doesn't have a massive campus yet. It has a very small campus currently, but we are currently building, or currently working on building a massive campus for it, a 1.8 billion Rand project. But that's not going to be finished next year, but it is something, the next step after we've built Soltech, that's now the next thing we're moving on to. Another example of how do you survive in a failed state is through all these steps of state-proofing your community. So when you've already pretty much have your safety under control through community neighborhood watches and through emergency safety infrastructure that you've built, that we've, for example, at Afriforum already established. If you've already have things like your schools sorted out and your education of your children sorted out, and that's state-proofed, that's another thing that's not going to be affected. And then another big thing is in regards to, as you mentioned earlier, food security, and well, basically I would call it resource security, all the basic resources that you need, water, electricity. If you have that state-proofed, again, that's another thing that you're not going to be affected by if the state starts to fail. As in South Africa, we're already seeing the signs of it. So it's not something where just one day you can snap your fingers and you say, well, my community is state-proof. It's a continuous process. So it's not, okay, let's use the metaphor of the Titanic. The ANC government, or the ANC, the government and the state is the sinking ship. We're not building another Titanic next to it to survive. State-proofing means you're building life rafts. You're making sure that you will be able to survive and your basic necessities will be given to you. Doesn't mean that when the state fails, or when the state reaches a very large level of failure, that everything is going to be fine and you're going to live the normal life that you did. You're going to have to work very hard. There's going to be a lot asked of you. There's going to be a lot of responsibilities, but you will be safe and you will know that there's a future for your family and your children. So that's the thing. So maybe just to conclude there, I think people always talk about where they use the metaphor of the allegory of, for a futile endeavor. They say it's like moving chairs or rearranging chairs on the Titanic. But I think that's the wrong image to take from that catastrophe. The right lesson to take from that catastrophe is the fact that up until the very end, the crew of that ship was still operating under the assumption that the ship wasn't going to sink. They were thinking about, no, it's going to be fine, everything's going to be fine. And then at the last minute, they realized it's not going to be fine. And then everyone was rushing to the life rafts. And that's why a lot of these life rafts and lifeboats were filled under capacity. Some of them were filled like 30% or 20%. Some of them crashed into the water, and a lot of people died because of it. And they didn't use furniture from the ship, didn't fashion that into life rafts. And none of that was done. And none of the measures were done to save more lives, because up until the very end, they were functioning on the premise that the ship wasn't going to sink. So that is pretty much what the state-proofing strategy explained in Flip Base's book is all about, is we need to go on the premise that the ship is sinking, so we're going to take the necessary measures. It's not going to be perfect. It doesn't mean, like I said, we're building a separate country. It doesn't mean we're building a separate Titanic. We're just making sure that as much as possible of the effects of that state failure will be able to be mitigated, because we have to face a very stark reality. The vast majority of people in South Africa can't just immigrate. They don't have the luxury when the shit hits the fan to just get on a plane and move to a first world country. That is a very, very minute and a shrinking percentage of the country that have the resources and the ability to do that. So it's not a solution to just say, well, if things go bad, we'll just move to a different country. That is not a reality for the vast majority of people around you, and not even for a lot of your listeners. It's even a possibility. So that's why we are taking the precautions to pretty much make sure as much of the damage is mitigated if the ANC keeps on the current course that it is. It's not I'm not telling you a pretty fairy tale. It's pretty much, but it is. I see a lot of hope and innovation and excitement at the same time in this venture, because at the end of the day, we are pioneers. The people working on solutions for state-proofing the lives, the people working towards alternatives, as you also discuss on your podcast. The subject matter is we are pioneers in regarding finding solutions for problems that a lot of the world aren't even experiencing currently. Now, I see a lot of South Africa's problems occurring in many first world countries in the future if they continue electing the types of governments and ideologues that they are currently doing. So I think it's on the bright side, there is a very strong feeling of excitement being a pioneer for finding solutions to these types of problems.
So, I mean, with these problems and talking to the point, like how can communities still function and these 1.8 billion rand projects? I mean, how can these communities finance themselves? How do these projects finance themselves? Like, what's the best way to go about that?
Currently, the example that I can give you currently, I know where you want to go with the conversation. You can definitely enlighten the audience in a moment. But to give you the model that we're currently using at the Solidarity Movement is we're pretty much doing grassroots donations. So if you have an organization like Solidarity, a labor union that has 500,000 members, if you have an organization like Afriforum that has 278,000 members, and those members give their donations voluntarily to your organization, a lot of those funds can go towards building this infrastructure and pretty much financing all these state-proof projects.
Do they see any returns from like those large projects, or is it just a donation once off?
It's a monthly donation. So you sign up to become a member and then you pay a monthly fee. But it can be 50 Rand, 60 Rand, 70 Rand.
So like those universities and all that, if they donate to them.
That was, the Saltec campus wasn't with Afriforum's money. It was with the Solidarity Union's Bouwfonds, so a building fund that they established, where there was I think, I'm talking under correction, I think it was a once-off donation of 10 Rand per member, and that finance or 10 Rand donations, and that financed the first 100 million Rand of the 300 million project.
It's crazy.
So I mean, all these points you've discussed now lead me to think that there's the people that are funding this and the people that are throwing their weight behind it must obviously realize that this is they can't leave. You know, you just spoke about being Afrikaans. I grew up and went to Afrikaans schools, so I understand Afrikaans culture very well. And Afrikaans people have been in this country for generations. There's nowhere to go. They can't go back to Holland. This is it, you know, like there's no second passport for most Afrikaans people, you know, so they've got to make do with what they can. And
I'm personally a 9th generation. My family's been here since 1688.
Yeah. So like
for perspective, my family's been here longer than America's been a country.
Yeah. I mean, like no one in Europe is giving you a passport, you know? Like the European countries were totally different borders when your forefathers first arrived here. But so the question I want to get to is, what role does culture play in this? Because culture is clearly important. If you're going to try to get a group of people together behind a common goal, you know, having a common culture is quite important for this.
Yeah, and this leads me to pretty much cite Dr. Dirk Herman on this question. So when Saltec was built, there were some members of the commentariat of this country that said, it's a nice thing that Solidarity did here, but we need a Solidarity and an Afriforum for the entire country. The problem is then you don't really understand what Solidarity and Afriforum is. We can only do what we do because of the cultural energy that we have. In theory, you could say, all South Africans can unite around a common cause. Well, that goes against human nature in regards to these types of things. You need that cultural glue. You need that type of communal feeling. And this is
you
what
just have the South African government then. otherwise, right?
Yeah. Well, that's why when people say, why doesn't Afriforum do this? Why don't they do this? Things outside of the mandate given to us by our members, we say, well, if the South African government gave us a slice of tax money, then we can start doing those things. But we can't help everyone with the current resources that we have. We use our resources as prudently as possible in regards to as much impact that we can make to first and foremost help our members, because it's their money. That's the thing that makes Afriforum and Solidarity what we do possible. We don't have billionaire backers. Anton Rupert doesn't give us a cent. We're not backed by major corporations. We are backed by our hundreds of thousands of members. And if we don't prioritize their needs and their safety first, they can withdraw their money and their donation tomorrow, and then we will be pretty much back to zero members and irrelevant, and we will dissolve. So in regards to helping everyone, like I said, we wish we could, if the South African government were to give us some of those money, maybe just give us the VAT money, then we can use that. But until then, we have to use the donation money that we get. So in regards to other communities, that's something that Solidarity actually does, and Afriforum also to a large extent, is we help other communities that want to emulate what we're doing. We are always open to giving them our recipe for success. We give them all the information that we can in regards to building similar organizations to our Afriforum and Solidarity. And specifically now with Soltech, after that made such a splash in the news, I have a lot of colleagues that work over at Solidarity, and they say that week when that was in the news, I think for the first few weeks, their phones were just ringing from other communities that wanted to emulate it. And they were more than happy to get into correspondence with those communities. And up until this day, they are still in correspondence with many of those communities, giving them the basic ingredients in regards to how do you start. It's not something you can just do overnight. And this is something that Afriforum also does. So when we are approached, we've been approached by people from all over the world in regards to civil rights organizations and building your own cultural capital and building your community organizations and building community institutions. And we give them our recipe. We tell them how we do it. And a lot of them have emulated a lot of aspects of what we already achieved. But the thing is, and this is the hard reality, you need that cultural energy. That cultural energy is what makes it possible. It is what gives people that drive and that feeling of we're part of something bigger than ourselves. There's a reason why you don't really get organizations that try to help everyone. They try to cover every single problem in South Africa without any type of cultural or religious connection. And a good example of another non-profit organization is the Gift of the Givers that are also doing a lot of good work in South Africa. But again, if you just scratch below the surface, you see there's a religious community behind it. So again, there's a cultural element to it. And that's why culture is such an important element that people need to understand. That's the reason why I do my culture series on my channel, where I talk to people from different cultures in South Africa about the challenges that their culture faces today. Because the biggest problem that we have when we look at, for example, foreigners looking at South Africa is that they just see it through a racial lens. They just see a white population, a black population, and they think, well, I figured out the South African politics. It's just these two groups fighting. And it can't be farther from the truth. If you look within those communities, you'll see different cultural communities that have a very interesting history of each other, communities that get along well with each other, communities that don't get along well with each other. And if you're looking at it through a racial lens, it's not going to make sense to you. You're going to see two black factions or two black cultures that don't really cooperate well with each other, that don't even allow their children to marry into the other cultural group. And it's not going to make sense to you. If you're looking through a racial lens, you can say, but they're part of the same tribe. They're part of the same people. Why don't they work together? And you're going to remain this confused until you start looking at it through a cultural lens. And that was one of the reasons why I started my culture series, because someone on Twitter, American, replied to one of my tweets and said, all the Boers should just leave South Africa and come join their people in America, talking about just white Americans. And my reply to it was, I don't think you understand who my people are. My people are my culture, and people that speak my language, that share my values, that share my worldview. That's what a culture is. And that's something that you clearly don't understand. And they didn't like that at all. But then I thought, well, then I need to do this series to actually put my content where my mouth is, and to show people that this is what drives a lot of the behavior around them. And this is, if you can understand it, not only will the world and South Africa specifically make a lot more sense to you, you will also be able to interact with people from different cultures much more easily, because you will be interacting on the premise that, yes, this person, due to their culture, doesn't exactly share my worldview. Their hierarchy of priorities is maybe not the same as mine. They don't value this one principle more than this one, or the highest value or virtue in my culture might not be the highest value or virtue in their culture. And you need to start understanding that, or else you're going to have a hard time in South Africa.
100%. People discount culture. Maybe it's a 20th century thing that they don't, or 21st century thing. They don't think culture matters, but it plays a massive role. And one of the things that I noticed as someone who's grown up in an Afrikaans culture and having the luxury of being able to see into both English and Afrikaans culture is the work ethic of the Afrikaner culture is phenomenal. And this shines through, and obviously what shines through in what Afriforum is doing. It's literally, we're rolling up your sleeves and getting it done,
Well, yeah,
and I think that's
finish your thoughts first, Ricki. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I think that just is testament to why Afriforum and the solidarity movement has been so successful at building their own institutions. It's not easy to do that at all. It's a massive feat of will, and they've pulled it off. They've pulled it off well, and they've done it without stealing money from anyone.
Yeah, and I think that's due to there's a historical reason for that, and that's because the Afrikaners weren't colonialists; they were settlers. So they weren't part of a bigger empire. They weren't just a satellite of the Dutch or of the Germans or of the French. They were pretty much people that created their own fate and their own community in Africa. So that meant they had to do things themselves. They had to start building their own things. They weren't backed up by a big brother empire that will just be able to, if someone messes with you, then you can just call your big brother and he'll be able to help you. We were pretty much cut off from Europe, but to a large extent as well. The types of people that the Afrikaner community is made out of is specifically people that didn't want anything to do with the old world. They didn't want to live under kings anymore. They didn't want to work for the VOC. They didn't want to work for this massive corporate. The Vryburgers at the beginning with the Cape Colony were pretty much didn't want anything to do with this massive corporation. I mean, the castle at the Cape was pretty much a corporate venture. It wasn't a government that built it. It was pretty much a massive corporation with its own private army that built a castle there for their own corporate ends. And the Vryburgers, or the initial ancestors of the Afrikaners, didn't want anything to do with it. They didn't want to just be slaves for a corporation. They wanted to find their own way in Africa. And you can see that as well. When the British took over the Cape Colony, what did the Afrikaners do? They didn't stay there. They trekked into the bush rather than stay there and become anglicized. And if you look at it through just a monetary and a materialistic view, it would have been much better if they stayed in the colony and pretty much assimilated into the British Empire. They would have gotten all these riches, all these opportunities for business, better education, better infrastructure. Everything is better, but you would have lost your culture. And for that, they were willing to just trek into uncharted territory and to keep their religion and to keep their culture.
I mean, it took 200 years for the Afrikaner to reach earning parity with the English South African after they left the Cape Colony. It was only in the 1950s, 60s that they really reached income parity with English South Africans. Another thing that I found out not too long ago was that the first Boer republics had very similar constitutions and dealings with the early American state. And there was a large interest between the two parties, because the initial Afrikaner or Boer republics that were founded were founded on the principles of freedom and self-determination and self-reliance, etc. Yeah, very much in line with the early Americans.
Yeah, the Afrikaners have always been Republicans. I'm not talking about the political party in the US. I'm talking about the political concept. And it's always been about freedom and having your destiny in your own hands and being able to determine your own destiny. And I think if you understand that concept, and this might be an entire topic for a different day, but if you understand that concept, of the Afrikaners' mission and trek for self-determination and freedom and cultural preservation, a lot of South African history is going to start making sense to you. A lot of the big events in South African history is going to start making a lot more sense. And you're going to see it's always been about cultural anxiety and about a mission for freedom and to just have your own destiny in your own hands. And I think Alistair Sparks in his book, let me see if I can find it here. Yeah, here it is. In this book, The Mind of South Africa by Alistair Sparks. Phenomenal book about South Africa's history. But in this book, he makes a very pertinent point when he says, and he's an English-speaking South African, he says, and this is in the lead up to the 1994 election, and he says he understands the cultural anxiety of the Afrikaners to a large extent, because if the 1994 project fails, or the new South Africa fails, he, as an English-speaking South African, can move to New Zealand, Australia, the United Kingdom, America, and he will be surrounded by people that speak his language, share his religion, and share his culture and values to a very large extent. The Afrikaners didn't have that. If this gamble doesn't pay off, they are in a very, very tough situation. They are pretty much facing, as they have done in so many times in their history, cultural extinction, a very slow cultural extinction. And that's going to be the reality. And if you understand that cultural anxiety that goes with Afrikaner history, like I said, a lot of things are going to start making sense to you. And that's something that Milan Kundera actually wrote about very extensively, the mentality of small nations or the mentality of minorities. Your very existence always has a question mark hovering over it. There's never certainty. And this fight for existence and this fight for having a future where your culture or your community is preserved and has a future is something that majority cultures and very large nations just don't understand, because their future and the preservation of their culture is a given. It's something they've never had to worry about ever in their life. But if you're part of a minority community, whether that be a cultural or a linguistic minority, there's always a question mark regarding will your language or your culture still be here over 100 years? And that's also something you need to understand, a cultural element when it comes to South Africa. And it's not just the Afrikaners that face this type of challenge. A lot of cultural minorities and linguistic minorities in South Africa face the exact same challenge.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, we're a country that is rich with cultural diversity, and there's a couple of big tribes that dominate in South Africa, but there's a lot of small ones that their culture is literally being eradicated. There's no study of their language at universities. There's no written works being published. It's
and specifically through urbanization.
Yeah. And so this kind of spills over into our next point, like how these other groups who wish to achieve what Afriforum and Solidarity has achieved, how do they go about doing it? You guys say you've got the playbook, they can come and contact you. It's that easy? You guys obviously will share the information with them and they can go about doing. What if they want to join Afriforum?
Well, they are welcome to join Afriforum. Afriforum doesn't bar anyone from becoming a member. We're not going to refuse your money and your support. But at the same time, if you are, for example, let's say, Chwana member from somewhere in the Northwest, and you form just 0.001% of Afriforum's membership, it doesn't come as a surprise then that Afriforum isn't throwing all its resources into the Northwest. But we are still going to be fighting civil rights fights that affect you as a South African, and we're going to be fighting fights that will affect you in regards of your civil liberties. But the thing about emulating what Afriforum does, and this is only from my own perspective. I didn't write the handbook. That's what Bitvice and people like Kali Kriel have done. But for me, I think the first step is you need to identify who you are. You need to know what is going to be the central identity that you form your organization around. What are your values and what are your core principles that you will not compromise on? A good example is with Solidarity. Solidarity is an openly Christian union. As opposed to, there are two types of labor unions. There's a Christian union and a socialist union. Solidarity falls into the Christian union, where it's not ideologically driven through socialism, but rather through Christian values. And the thing with emulating that is and that's also an identity, and you're going to have to find that identity. That's going to be your first quest. Second thing you're going to have to do is you're going to have to figure out what is your mission? What do you want to achieve? Do you just want to preserve your language? Do you want to preserve your culture? Do you want to fight for civil rights in South Africa? Do you want to just do safety and infrastructure or safety infrastructure? What's going to be your goal? You need to identify that. Secondly, here comes the tricky part, and the part where most people fail that don't take this into account. You're going to have to start really thinking about how do you fund all this. Once you've already established what's your goal, how are you going to fund it? How are you going to sustainably fund it? And I think that's where a lot of the solutions that you talk about on this podcast actually come in, because I think that's the important step. And that's, like I said, unfortunately, where a lot of people that try this stumble.
So what you're telling me then is that, contrary to what Dusubis Makaiser and Adrian Basson say, Afriforum is not a racist organization that only supports white people.
No, Afriforum pretty much supports civil rights where they're being violated, supports the fight for civil rights where they're being violated by the government. And you can see this in a myriad of our projects. I mean, I'm just going to go off the top of my head. I mean, a very high profile case of ours is the Senzo Mayiwa case, that Bafana goalkeeper that was murdered. Our private prosecution unit is making sure that there's justice in that case. We're representing his family. They actually approached us and asked. And the thing is, for example, let's take that case. Why Afriforum is getting involved there is that if this can happen to a high-profile person like Senzo Mayiwa, who's pretty much a South African celebrity, what chance does the average South African have, whether he be black, white, Afrikaner, or English? And that's why, out of principle, we're doing this case, because it inherently has to do with civil rights in South Africa. Another good example of what we do is we do cultural. We did a campaign, or not a campaign, we helped the Baroka Seleka tribe in the Eastern Free State. They were dispossessed of their throne, or their claim to the throne there, by the Ace Magashule faction in the ANC, and replaced by a bunch of yes men for the government. And I was actually lucky enough to go on that trip where we visited them. We visited the princess and her royal family there, and we represented them in court. And that's still an ongoing case as far as I'm aware. And another thing that we did, and this is actually something that really hits the ANC in a soft spot, is the fact that in regards to Nkandla, in Nkandla, we Afriforum had a court order issued and won a court case that forced the municipality there to build a school that was promised to that community that they just weren't getting to. So these are the types of things that Afriforum does, and we pretty much are the one of many people and organizations standing between the government and absolute tyranny, and the government doesn't care about your civil liberties. The government doesn't care about your civil rights. They just want to find every little point or opportunity to exploit it, and pretty much erode away for your civil liberties. So that's why civil society is so important. That's why civil society organizations like Dear SA, Afriforum, Solidarity, the Institute of Race Relations, that's why we're so important, because we're pretty much the last line between the government and pretty much just throwing all your civil liberties and rights down the toilet, or down the pit toilet, I should rather say, and not really caring about it. So that's it's funny to see the propagandists pretty much try to frame Afriforum as this radical organization, but we have such good relations with many communities in South Africa. We try, because we follow the philosophy of no community is an island. We can't save our own community while the communities around us are suffering and being destroyed by a malicious government and a malicious ideology. That's not sustainable. Your own community is not going to be able to survive if the communities around you are being decimated. It's not a recipe for success. That's why we are trying to help as many people adjacent to us as well, and that's going to help all of us in the future.
Okay, so Afriforum and Solidarity and other civic organizations like the IRR, etc., are doing fantastic work. You guys are building institutions, you're gaining ground, you've got great paying members. So at some point, you're going to become a fly in the ointment for the government, just purely out of the embarrassment that you're causing to them because you're so successful when they're not being. So the question I've got now is how do civic organizations become anti-fragile so as to reduce the attack surface that's available to the government to shut them down. So, for example, there's choke points government can apply pressure to when it comes to shutting you down. So, for example, negative PR campaigns, as we've seen with the State Security Agency paying off journalists for a decade now. To create negative views of Afriforum. You know, when I speak to English people in Cape Town about Afriforum, the first thing they say is racist. You know, there's clearly been a negative connotation that's been created in the press against you. The second one is which is probably more important than the PR side, is the financial choke points, and that's where Brandon and I really want to get into and what potential solutions there are. But financial choke points, like we've seen it. We've seen big corporates caving to the government time after time. And a prime example of this was WikiLeaks, right? So WikiLeaks was censored by the US government because of Julian Assange and because of the information they were sharing. And they got Visa and MasterCard stopped processing their payments because they tried to cut off their funding mechanisms. They effectively couldn't gather any US dollar or any fiat payments of any kind. They didn't have any bank accounts. And the only funding mechanism they had available to them was Bitcoin. And because of that, they made like a 5,000% return on their holdings and became far more powerful than what they would have been before. Okay. And because of that, they could afford to fight the legal battles in court for a decade, still ongoing, trying to get Julian Assange out of the UK now currently. And then thirdly, it's the legislative choke points. That's a difficult one, as we spoke about earlier, the judicial side. You know, that becomes tough when you've got a captured judiciary that no longer serves the needs of justice, but a lot of the political elite. But yeah, on those kind of with reference to those 3 points, what are you guys doing to become anti-fragile?
Well, I think the important question is the finance side. What happens when the tap is turned off, or in regards to your bank accounts are just disabled and you're labeled a persona non grata? Well, the thing is with Afriforum, that is also, like I say, just as with the judicial question, that's something that we are currently, one of our big focuses for the future is becoming state-proof in regards to our finances as well. Because in the end, it's that weak link that's going to break you, is the fact that you can be as state-proof as you want, but you're still using a financial institution that can be pressured by the government that's not state-proof. Then you get into trouble. So yeah, that's one of the big questions that a lot of our big brains up there in the solidarity movement are working on solutions for. But you seem to be burning to tell me your solution. You seem to actually have a solution, and I'd like to have you actually explain that to me.
Brandon, do you wanna take this one?
Yeah, sure. So I mean, I think the whole premise is around you guys need to just get money from donors, and I think it's quite easy to understand that your donors can donate Bitcoin to you. So there is open source software out there that's free to use that you can actually plug into your website to receive Bitcoin, and no entity controls that. There's solutions such as BTC Pay Server that people have built in an MIT license. So this is a way for you to receive Bitcoin now. And then if you were to ever need Rand, so you received your Bitcoin. Now you need to secure it. So the big honchos in your organization can work out a way of securing that through like a multi-sig wallet to say there's 5 directors and 3 of them need to sign a transaction. So 3 of them need to agree to a transaction being paid or sent out of a wallet to pay a provider or to send to another organization or something like that. So that's a way you can control the quorum of fund movements. So there's not a single person controlling the account, and that's a great inherent characteristic of Bitcoin. And then third of all, it's now you don't have a bank account, right? Let's just say the government turned that off. How the hell do you get rands? Because you need to pay some providers or some other people with rand. There's peer-to-peer providers or platforms in South Africa right now where you can easily.
Yeah, we've lost Brandon there. Yeah, we've lost Brandon.
Did you pick up where you left off?
Yeah. So the point Brandon was getting to is that, okay, so you've got day-to-day bills to pay. Now, let's say you Afriforum and you're collecting your donations in Bitcoin. You want to keep a portion of that in treasury because Bitcoin is a really great asset to hang on to for a long period of time. So you can get the potential upside, let's say over a 5 to 10 year time horizon. But in the short term, you guys got bills to pay. So you got to convert some of your Bitcoin to rands. So the argument that someone would make is that say they would just regulate the off ramps. So you can't convert Bitcoin to rands because your accounts are shut down. So a very robust peer-to-peer market has developed all over the world. And what a peer-to-peer market is from me going to another individual and trading Bitcoin for rand and vice versa. So for example, in Nigeria, they banned Bitcoin for about 3 weeks. The peer-to-peer market went absolutely wild to the point where about 37% of Nigerians were involved in Bitcoin transactions because they were freaking out. Because if the government's banning Bitcoin, what does that say about the Naira? Why are they banning Bitcoin? So they've done it in China. They've done it in India. Wherever they ban Bitcoin, the peer-to-peer markets just boom because naturally people are going to trade and they want to protect their wealth. So there's already off-ramps that are censorship resistant that no one can stop you from using. So from the perspective of being able to pay for your day-to-day bills, you can take care of it that way. Obviously, it's not as easy as just swiping your debit card and paying with rands. But they were like, this is the price you pay for self-sovereignty and being self-reliant and not having to deal with the government's payment methods. But that's a short-term logistical issue. For me, of much greater importance is the long-term importance of an organization like Afriforum or Solidarity hanging onto Bitcoin for 5, 10, 15, 20 years, because you're hanging on to what's effectively slowly becoming the global reserve currency. And then the rand can devalue. The government is going to print money. We know it's going to happen. They've already been printing money during COVID, and that's only going to speed up as they run out of taxpayers and they can't service their debts. So the only easy route out is to hyperinflate. So if you're as an organization or a civic institution, if your fate is tied to that of the rand, all of the hard work you guys have done for decades is going to be undone by hyperinflation. And to protect yourself against that, I'm not saying go 100% into Bitcoin, but have a portion of your reserve, your treasury in Bitcoin. You can protect yourself from that. And then over the long term, your purchasing power will increase so much that your influence and clout will be astronomically increased as a result.
Absolutely.
Brandon, did he cover what you wanted to say?
No, so I lost you guys for a second. I apologize for that. But what Ricki was saying was actually what I was leading towards. And that is the most important part. Because we live in a world now where, let's just say Afriforum earns or gets all these donations. You need to put it somewhere and you want to earn some yield on it because you've got a long-term outlook. And unfortunately, bonds effectively in Western countries are looking at negative yields, and it will happen here. No doubt about that. And with inflation rates going astronomical levels because of printing money on the left side, and on the right side, there's a bit more intricacies there, but we're going to see a lot of inflation due to ill investments in, infrastructure such as oil, because of the drops, the drawdowns last year, because of the price levels going down. There was no investment that happened there, which means there's going to be a complete supply shock this year or next. And there's no, and as the world restarts, there's a demand increases. And there's literally about 7,000 products on the shelf right now that are all oil based, or actually have a certain layer of price linked to oil. So we're going to see inflation on both sides, if that makes sense. Which means your little investments at your traditional investment firms in a money market fund of like 6% is actually going to be effectively negative. So there's no yield anymore to chase. And that's why people need to look at other asset classes such as Bitcoin that has proven 200% return year on year. Doesn't mean it will in the future, but historics is what investment managers use looking forward. So that's where Ricki talks about like looking at something where you can grow your monetary worth in an organization or as a personal individual. And really, the most important part is if you self-custody that, secure it with no counterparty risk, you are self-sovereign from the beginning. You can maintain your own future. That's the most important part.
And just to tie into what Brandon is saying there, is it also allows for international trade. Because if you've got a savings account in the global reserve currency, currently that's USD, but that will not, we know through history, that's not going to be the case forever. If you're building something that's got a 100-year time horizon here, you're going to want to have money that you can trade with international trading partners with, irrespective of what your local currency is. And if the rand is hyperinflating due to the government printing it, no trading partner is going to want that. So you position yourself in a much stronger position if you just have some allocation to Bitcoin. So I mean, this is the point we want to get across to the broader self-sovereign community in South Africa, is that you don't need to, the solution to your monetary problems is here. It's built, it's open source, it's been tested by fire, it's been attacked, and it comes back stronger every single time. And the world governments around the world are starting to wake up to it. Just today, we saw 2 nation states announce that they are zero rating capital gains tax on Bitcoin. So Japan and was it Portugal, Brandon? I think it was Portugal, yeah.
Yeah, it's Portugal.
Both of them Portugal said they've reduced their tax by half for Bitcoiners, and Japan came out and said no tax on Bitcoiners for capital gains, because they're trying to attract that capital, which tells you that other countries are starting to take note, and they're trying to attract that capital. And I think it'll be prudent for an institution that is trying to make itself anti-fragile as possible to take a similar approach, and decouple itself from the fate of effectively what can become a failing fiat currency.
Well, that's very fascinating stuff. You guys should book a chat with some of the top brass there at Afriforum Solidarity. I think they'll definitely listen to you.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. We're more than happy to come and talk to them, because ultimately, like, I don't want to leave South Africa, even though I'm English. I don't have a foreign passport. My family's been here for 5-6 generations. There's no going anywhere for me, really.
Me too.
Yeah, I mean, Brandon's a funny character, you know. I mean, that doesn't speak a word of Afrikaans, but we both of us have a dog in this fight. Like, we want to see some aspect of it, of South Africa succeed. So, you know, we don't want to leave. And I think personally, between the two of us, like, we've been Bitcoiners for years now, and the level of self-sovereignty is given to us personally is massive, and the resilience is given to us is massive, and we would like to see that same be applied to an organization that has similar goals to what we do.
No, absolutely. No, well, thank you for those insights. It's not a field that I have a lot of knowledge on, so anyone that can inform me in regards to the dynamics of it and the implications for the future and how it can contribute towards state-proofing your life is always welcome.
Yeah, well, we're busy trying to twist Russell Lamberti's arm to come and chat to us about his perspective on Bitcoin. I know he's been a Bitcoiner for a while, and you know, he's got a big audience, and it's time we start getting South Africans to talk about this, because, you know, it's the rand is the elephant in the room, man. There's you know, if people have got another thing coming if they think it's going to remain stable for the next decade or two.
No, absolutely.
Yeah. All right, Brandon, have you got any other questions you want to throw Ernst's way?
No, all good my side. Thanks so much for your time, man.
All right.
Well, thank you very much for having me on. I really appreciate it. It was an excellent chat. Time flew by.
Yeah, it was great. It was great. And yeah, thank you so much once again, Ernst, and I look forward to chatting again soon.
Cheers, guys. Have a good one.
Cheers,
Okay,
guys.
have a good one. Cheers, guys.